She only wanted to prove herself. Jenna Davis was never afraid of hard work. But when the locals scoffed at her decision to restore an old rusted Jeep sitting by the river, she knew they didn't understand. But she didn't need their approval, she had a vision. What they didn't know was that this Jeep would end up changing not only her life, but the entire town's view of her abilities. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. If you're inspired by stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode will reveal the shocking twist that no one saw coming. Let's get started. The sun hung low over the small town of Riverbend, casting long shadows over the fields and dirt roads. The sound of crickets filled the air, mixing with the distant hum of a tractor. It was a quiet, sleepy place, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business, and where newcomers were often met with a raised eyebrow and a slow, scrutinizing glance. Jenna Davis wasn't a stranger, but she might as well have been. As the only female mechanic in Riverbend, she'd spent the last 5 years fighting an uphill battle to prove herself in a world dominated by men. Her shop, tucked away on the outskirts of town, was small, modest, and often ignored. But that didn't bother Jenna. She loved working with her hands, loved the challenge of bringing life back to forgotten machines. And there was one machine that was calling to her now. It sat by the river, just outside the small town, rusting and forgotten, covered in weeds and mud. A Jeep. Not just any Jeep, though. This one had history. Jenna had heard the stories from the older folks at the diner. It belonged to a local legend, a man who'd built his fortune in the hills before disappearing without a trace decades ago. The Jeep had been abandoned, left to rot, with no one willing to take on the task of fixing it. The idea of restoring it seemed like a fool's errand, a waste of time. But to Jenna, it was more than just a rusted frame. It was a challenge. She stood at the edge of the riverbank, the late afternoon sun glinting off the water, casting a golden hue over the dilapidated Jeep. The tires were half sunk in the mud, the body covered in moss and dirt. The engine, once mighty, was now a forgotten shell. Yet Jenna saw potential. She saw a project waiting to be brought back to life, a piece of history just waiting for someone with the right skills and the right vision to restore it. Her heart raced as she took a deep breath, surveying the work ahead of her. "This is going to be a long haul," she muttered to herself, rolling up the sleeves of her red mechanic shirt. It was just the kind of challenge she thrived on. But the town had other ideas. As she unloaded her tools from the back of her truck, a group of locals passed by. They slowed as they saw her, their laughter carrying in the cool breeze. "Jenna, are you out of your mind?" called out Mike, the owner of the local auto parts store. "That thing's been sitting there for years. It's a lost cause." Others chuckled and shook their heads. "She's wasting her time," one of them said. "She'll never get it running. It's beyond saving." Jenna's jaw tightened. She had heard it all before: the doubts, the whispers, the disapproving stares. But this time, something inside her snapped. "Watch me," she said under her breath, determined to prove them all wrong. She was used to being underestimated, but she didn't mind. She knew that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones fought in silence, where the only person who had to believe in her was herself. With one last glance at the group of mocking faces, Jenna turned her attention back to the Jeep. She could already hear the sound of the engine purring beneath her fingers. The road ahead would be difficult, but it wasn't the first time she had taken on the impossible. As she began to remove the rusted grille, she could almost feel the weight of the town's expectations lift off her shoulders. This wasn't just about restoring an old Jeep. This was about proving to herself, and to them, that a woman could take on a challenge like this and come out victorious. She worked tirelessly, undeterred by the mocking voices that lingered in the background. As the sun set behind her, Jenna knew that she had just taken the first step toward proving everyone wrong. And the best part? She was just getting started. The following morning, Jenna arrived at the riverbank just as the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. She didn't mind starting early. It was when the world was still quiet, the air crisp with possibility, that she could focus without distraction. The Jeep stood waiting for her, a rusted shell of what it once was. But to Jenna, it was a blank canvas, and she was determined to make it whole again. She pulled out a wrench and began loosening the bolts on the front bumper. The metal groaned in protest, but it gave way under her persistence. Each piece she removed revealed more of the Jeep's skeleton, and as she worked, her mind wandered back to the stories she'd heard about the vehicle. They said it had been owned by a man named Charlie Larkin, a local legend who had mysteriously vanished years ago. No one knew what happened to him, but the Jeep was left behind, abandoned by the side of the river, untouched for decades. Jenna ran her fingers over the hood, tracing the deep scratches and faded paint. The Jeep had a history, a story, hidden beneath layers of neglect, and Jenna was determined to uncover it. As she worked, a strange thought began to creep into her mind. What if there was more to this Jeep than just mechanical problems? What if it held something else? Something Charlie had left behind before disappearing? The idea was ridiculous, she knew. But there was something about this Jeep, something that felt different from all the other rusted relics she'd worked on. She knelt down to remove the rusted bolts on the side panels when something caught her eye. A small, inconspicuous latch hidden beneath the frame. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't supposed to be there. It didn't look like part of the Jeep's original design. Curious, Jenna reached for it, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled the latch open. A hidden compartment. Her breath caught in her throat as she lifted the small panel. Inside was a dusty, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, maybe even decades. Jenna carefully pulled it from its hiding place, her hands shaking with excitement. Could this be Charlie's? Had he hidden something inside the Jeep before disappearing? She turned the pages gently, scanning the handwriting that was scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic way. The journal told a different story than the one the town had always believed. There were entries about Charlie's time spent working on the Jeep, but it was more than that. The journal contained notes about a hidden stash of valuables, old artifacts, gold, and other treasures that Charlie had found during his time working as a mechanic in the town. The entries grew more cryptic as they went on, speaking of a secret location and a key to something greater. The last entry was short, almost rushed. The Jeep is the key. Find it, and the rest will follow. Jenna's pulse raced as she flipped through the pages. She could feel the weight of the discovery sinking in. This wasn't just a Jeep. It was a clue, a map, maybe. She had no idea what Charlie had meant, but the journal was clear about one thing. There was something hidden, something worth finding, and it was tied to this rusted vehicle. Her thoughts swirled as she closed the journal, tucking it into her bag for safekeeping. She couldn't focus on that now. There was work to be done. But the journal had ignited something in her. This wasn't just about fixing a Jeep anymore. This was about uncovering a mystery, one that had been buried for years. Jenna's determination grew stronger with each turn of the wrench, each bolt she removed. The Jeep wasn't just a mechanical puzzle. It was a gateway to something bigger, something hidden in the past, and she was going to find it. As she worked, she heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw Mike from the auto parts store again, his arms crossed, a skeptical look on his face. "Well, look at you," he said with a smirk. "You really think you're going to fix that piece of junk? You're wasting your time." Jenna didn't answer immediately. She just gave him a steady, unblinking look. "You'll see," she said finally. "Just wait." Mike raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but Jenna didn't care. She had her focus now, and nothing was going to stop her from finishing what she'd started. The Jeep was more than just a vehicle now. It was a puzzle, a challenge she couldn't walk away from. And whatever secrets it held, she would be the one to uncover them. As the days passed, Jenna's dedication to the Jeep grew stronger. The rust was slowly being chipped away. The engine parts began to fall into place, and the sunburn on her neck deepened from long hours in the heat. Yet, for every bolt she tightened, for every piece of the puzzle that came together, the mocking whispers from the townsfolk grew louder. It wasn't just Mike anymore. No, it had become a spectacle. As Jenna worked on the Jeep by the river, a steady stream of curious onlookers started to gather. Some came out of genuine curiosity, while others just wanted to see her fail. "Look at her go, Dave," the local mechanic from down the road called out one afternoon as he leaned against his truck. "That thing's been dead for years, and she thinks she can bring it back to life like it's just another lawnmower?" Jenna's hand tightened around the wrench, her knuckles white. She didn't let their words reach her, but the heat in her chest was a reminder that they were getting under her skin. She had always been the underdog in this town. The women in Riverbend were supposed to bake cookies, not fix cars. It had never bothered her before. But now, as the crowd began to form every day, she felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She ignored them, focusing on the Jeep. Every time she turned a wrench, she imagined herself silencing their voices with the sound of the engine roaring to life. But it was hard. Hard not to feel the sting of their laughter. Hard not to hear their whispers behind her back. "She'll never finish it. You know it's going to break down halfway through, right?" Sarah, a neighbor who ran the local cafe, said loud enough for Jenna to hear. "I give it a month. Tops." The words hurt more than she cared to admit. These were people she'd known her whole life, people she thought would have her back. Instead, they laughed and watched, waiting for her to fail. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, reminding her of the time Jenna had asked for her support when she started her mechanic shop. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," her mother had said. "You're good enough just as you are." But it didn't feel like enough anymore. This wasn't just about fixing cars. This was about showing them all, about proving that women could do anything they set their minds to, even the things that were traditionally reserved for men. Jenna wiped the sweat from her brow and grabbed a crowbar. She dug it into the frame of the Jeep, prying off a stubborn piece of rusted metal. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed in the quiet air, and for a moment, she imagined it was the sound of the laughter fading away. Just then, Mike walked up, shaking his head. "You really think this is going to work?" he asked, crossing his arms. "Why waste your time on something that'll never run again?" Jenna straightened up, meeting his gaze. "Because I believe it can," she said, her voice steady. "And one day you'll see it run just as good as any of the cars in your shop." Mike laughed, a low, condescending chuckle. "You're going to be disappointed, sweetheart. But I'll be here when it falls apart. You'll need someone to help you fix it then." Jenna didn't flinch. "Maybe I'll surprise you," she said, her tone sharper now. But inside, she was struggling. She had worked on countless cars, each of them a challenge in its own right. But this Jeep was different. It wasn't just about fixing an engine. It was about something deeper. There was history here, a connection to the past that Jenna couldn't ignore. It had to be fixed, not just for herself, but for everyone who ever doubted her. She turned back to the Jeep and continued working, even though every voice in her head told her she was wasting her time. Despite all the mocking, despite all the doubt, Jenna's determination only grew stronger. "I'll finish this Jeep," she whispered to herself, "and I'll make sure they all know I did it." She could almost hear their laughter now, but it didn't bother her. Instead, it fueled her. They didn't know her like she knew herself. And when the Jeep roared to life, they'd have no choice but to see her for who she really was. A mechanic, a woman who wasn't afraid to take on the impossible. The challenge was on, and Jenna Davis wasn't going to back down. The sun had barely begun to set when Jenna finally decided to call it a day. Sweat dripped from her forehead, and her muscles ached from hours of labor, but she was making progress. The Jeep was starting to take shape again. The body was stripped down, the engine was halfway rebuilt, and Jenna could already see the first glimmers of what it could become. But as she stood up from under the hood, wiping her hands on a rag, her eyes were drawn to the old leather-bound journal again, the one she had found hidden in the Jeep's floorboard. She had set it aside earlier, intending to go through it later, but now, something about it seemed even more urgent. It wasn't just the cryptic notes and strange messages, it was the weight of what she was beginning to realize. This Jeep wasn't just an abandoned relic. It was a treasure chest, and Charlie Larkin had known it all along. She sat down on the hood of the Jeep, the leather of the journal soft and warm beneath her fingertips. With a sigh, she opened it to the next page, scanning the handwritten text as she had done countless times before. But this time, her eyes caught something that made her heart race. A map. The page was almost completely covered in a hand-drawn sketch, a rough outline of the town with strange markings along the edges. It wasn't a map to any place Jenna recognized, but there was one mark that stood out. Right at the base of the river, where the Jeep had been abandoned, was a circle, drawn in bold ink. "The key is beneath the old oak tree," the journal read. Jenna's fingers trembled as she traced the words. Beneath the old oak tree. The words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't place them at first. Then it hit her. There was an ancient oak on the edge of the property where the Jeep had been left, its gnarled branches stretching across the river. She had passed it countless times growing up, but she never imagined it could hold any significance. She stared at the map for a moment longer, then snapped the journal shut. Her pulse quickened. The clues had been right in front of her this whole time. This Jeep, this restoration project. It wasn't just about fixing something old. It was about uncovering something buried, a mystery that had been hidden for decades. Without another thought, Jenna grabbed a flashlight from her tool bag and headed toward the riverbank. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. She moved quickly, her heart beating faster with each step as she approached the oak tree. It was larger than she remembered, its twisted roots winding deep into the earth. The bark was rough and weathered, covered in patches of moss. But Jenna didn't care about the tree's appearance. She cared about what was underneath it. She knelt down by the roots, the flashlight trembling in her hand. There, buried beneath the roots, was a small, weathered box. It was half hidden beneath the dirt and fallen leaves, but Jenna could make out the edges of it. Her breath caught in her throat as she dug it out, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of the box. When she opened it, her heart skipped a beat. Inside, nestled against the velvet lining, was a key, an old, rusted key. It was simple in design, but it felt heavier than it looked, as though it held a secret that only it could unlock. Jenna held the key in her hand, feeling the weight of its significance. This was it. This was what Charlie had been trying to tell her. The Jeep wasn't just a vehicle. It was a key to something more. But what? And where did it fit? She stood there for a long moment, the key warm in her palm, as the sound of the river rushing nearby filled the air. The mystery was far from over. But now, Jenna had the missing piece. The Jeep had led her to this moment, but it wasn't just about restoring an old car anymore. It was about something much bigger. The key was just the beginning. Jenna knew one thing for sure now. She was on the verge of uncovering something that would change everything. And she wasn't going to stop until she found out what it was. Jenna's hands trembled as she placed the rusted key in her pocket, the weight of its significance anchoring her to the earth. She stood beneath the old oak tree for a moment longer, gazing at the water flowing just beyond the roots, feeling a sense of awe settle over her. This wasn't just about fixing a Jeep anymore. This was something more, something tied to the past, to a mystery that she had only begun to scratch the surface of. With the key now in her possession, Jenna knew there was no turning back. The restoration of the Jeep had taken on a life of its own, and she was no longer just trying to prove the doubters wrong. She was unraveling a story, a history, and perhaps, just perhaps, finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. As she made her way back to the Jeep, she could hear the quiet hum of her tools calling to her. The work needed to continue. The Jeep needed to be restored, not just for the secrets it held, but for the promise she had made to herself, to finish what she started. She threw open the hood of the Jeep once more, inspecting the engine. The progress so far had been slow but steady, and she could feel herself inching closer to something that felt more like a dream than a project. But now, with the key in her possession, the Jeep felt alive under her hands. It was like every turn of the wrench, every bolt she tightened, was bringing it and her closer to something incredible. The engine turned over with a satisfying click as Jenna reconnected the fuel line. She had replaced the corroded battery, cleaned the carburetor, and checked every inch of the engine. Now, it was time to see if the old beast would respond. She gripped the ignition key with a sense of purpose and twisted it. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. A sense of triumph surged through her, and she couldn't help but smile. The roar of the engine wasn't just the sound of a car starting up. It was the sound of every doubt, every mockery, every naysayer silenced by the power of her own hands. She had done it. She had made it work. But even as the engine purred softly, Jenna knew that this was just the beginning. There was still much to do, fixing the brakes, reworking the suspension, restoring the body, and of course, figuring out what to do with the key she had found. But for now, the fact that the Jeep had come back to life was a victory in itself. She wiped the grease from her hands and stood back, admiring her work. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was alive, and that was more than enough. Jenna's sense of accomplishment didn't last long, however. She could feel the eyes of the town upon her again. The same faces that had watched her struggle, that had laughed and doubted, were still there, waiting for her to slip up. But now, instead of feeling the sting of their judgment, she stood taller. She wasn't just fixing a car. She was proving a point. She was showing them that anyone could make something great if they had the drive to follow through. As she turned to grab her tools, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Jenna," Mike's voice called out from behind her. "You really got it to start?" Jenna didn't turn around. She just leaned against the Jeep, her arms crossed, a confident smile creeping onto her lips. "I told you I would," she said, her voice steady. "You just didn't believe me." There was a moment of silence, and Jenna could feel Mike's gaze on her. Finally, he muttered something under his breath, though Jenna didn't catch the words. She didn't need to. She knew what had just happened. For the first time, Mike had nothing left to say. She turned toward him, her smile still in place. "Want to see how far it'll go?" Mike hesitated, then shook his head, his lips curling into a small smile. "No, I'll leave you to it." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Jenna standing alone with the Jeep. She looked back at the engine, still idling contentedly. It was a small victory, but it was hers. Jenna knew that it wouldn't be long before the town's opinion started to shift. They couldn't ignore her forever. Not when the Jeep was running, not when the restoration was almost complete, and certainly not when they saw what she could do with the key she had found. As she worked late into the night, Jenna felt the weight of the future on her shoulders. The Jeep was no longer just a machine. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for. It was proof that dreams, no matter how rusty or forgotten, could always be brought back to life. The days seemed to blur together as Jenna continued her work on the Jeep. It was a rhythm now, one she'd grown used to, waking up at dawn, heading straight to the river, and working until the sun dipped below the horizon. The mocking whispers had quieted down for the moment, but Jenna didn't let up. Each day, the Jeep got closer to its original glory. Each day, she could feel the weight of her hard work paying off. But today was different. As she was under the Jeep, tightening the transmission bolts, she heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. She didn't look up at first, thinking it was just one of the regulars from the town. But the footsteps stopped in front of her, and the shadow that fell across the ground made her pause. She pulled herself out from under the Jeep, wiping her hands on a rag. Standing there, blocking the last of the daylight, was a man, tall, older than her by at least a decade, with a weathered face and a worn leather jacket. His hair was graying, his eyes hidden behind a pair of sunglasses, and his posture was stiff, like he'd seen more than his share of battles in life. Jenna squinted at him, unsure if she knew him. He didn't look familiar, but there was something about him that made her pause. The stranger studied the Jeep for a moment, eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of the partially restored vehicle. "You fixing this thing?" the man asked, his voice low and rough. Jenna straightened, wiping a smudge of grease from her cheek. That's the plan, she replied, trying to hide the cautious tone in her voice. He chuckled, though it didn't sound like an amused laugh, more like a resigned one. I can see that. He paused for a moment, eyeing the Jeep with something almost resembling regret in his gaze. You know what you're dealing with here? Jenna raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was headed. I know what I'm doing, she said. I've worked on enough old cars to know a challenge when I see one. The man gave a small nod, then stepped closer. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. He handed it to Jenna, without a word. The photo was old, faded, and yellowing at the edges. It showed a young man, maybe in his early 20s, standing beside the very Jeep Jenna was restoring. The young man wore a grin that was part pride, part mischief, and he stood proudly with one hand resting on the Jeep's hood. But it wasn't the young man in the photo that made Jenna's stomach drop. It was the way the photograph was taken. The man in the picture had the same posture, the same smirk, as the stranger standing in front of her now. That's Charlie Larkin, the man said, his voice quiet but thick with emotion. My brother. Jenna's heart skipped a beat. The name rang a bell. Charlie Larkin, the legendary figure in Riverbend, the man whose Jeep she was restoring, the man who had disappeared, leaving the town with only rumors and unanswered questions. Charlie's Jeep, Jenna said slowly, still staring at the photograph in disbelief. You're his brother? The man nodded, his gaze now fixed on the Jeep, as if it had become a living thing. Name's Sam Larkin, he said. I heard someone was fixing up Charlie's old Jeep, and I had to see it for myself. Jenna swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. I didn't know Charlie had a brother, she said, her voice quiet. Sam's lips tightened. A lot of people didn't. After he disappeared, I stayed away. I didn't want to drag up old memories for anyone, but I heard rumors about the Jeep, about what he left behind. Jenna felt a chill run down her spine. The Jeep. It wasn't just a machine, it was a connection to the past, to Charlie Larkin's mysterious disappearance. What do you mean? She asked, unable to stop herself. What did he leave behind? Sam's eyes shifted toward the ground, his jaw working as though he was struggling to find the right words. Charlie was into some things that most people wouldn't have understood, things that got him into trouble. But the Jeep, he paused, looking back at Jenna. It's more than just a car. It was his last project, his last attempt at fixing something that went wrong. But there's more to it. There's a reason he disappeared, and the Jeep, it's part of that reason. Jenna's pulse quickened, her thoughts spinning. Could it be? Could this Jeep really be more than just a forgotten relic? Her eyes fell to the key she still had tucked in her pocket. Was it connected to this? Was the key really the key to unraveling a mystery that went deeper than she had ever imagined? Why didn't you come back sooner? She asked, her voice filled with both suspicion and curiosity. Why wait until now? Sam shifted uncomfortably, his gaze distant. I wasn't ready. I needed time to figure things out. But Charlie's Jeep, it's more than just an old car to me. It's the last part of him that's left. I came here to see if you were the one who could finally put it all back together. Maybe you're the one who can find out what really happened to him. Jenna's heart raced. This was it. The mystery she had been unraveling was much bigger than she thought. Charlie Larkin had left behind more than just a broken Jeep. He had left behind a story. And now, with Sam standing in front of her, Jenna was at the center of it. I need your help, Sam said, his voice low but urgent. The key to Charlie's secret is hidden in that Jeep, and I need someone who can bring it back to life. Someone who's willing to go further than just fixing it. Are you that person? Jenna looked at the Jeep, her fingers lightly brushing the key in her pocket. Her mind raced, but deep down, she knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just about a restoration. It was about solving a mystery that had been buried for far too long. The weight of Sam's words lingered in the air long after he had left. Jenna stood in front of the Jeep, the same rusted frame she had been working on for weeks, but now it seemed different, heavier somehow. The mystery had deepened, and with it, Jenna's resolve. The key she had found, the strange map in the journal, and now the revelation that Charlie Larkin's disappearance was somehow tied to the Jeep. It all seemed too much to ignore. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of secret could be hidden in an old vehicle, but Sam's insistence that this wasn't just a simple restoration made her heart race. Was this truly something worth uncovering? Or had she just stumbled into something far more dangerous than she realized? Determined not to let the doubts linger, Jenna threw on her gloves and got back to work. She had always relied on hard work to drown out the noise in her head, and today was no different. She would focus on what she knew, restoring the Jeep, and let the answers reveal themselves as she went along. The day passed in a blur of rusted metal, grease-stained hands, and the persistent hum of tools. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Jenna wiped her brow and stood back, surveying the progress. The engine was now fully rebuilt, the transmission purring like a well-oiled machine. It was the moment she had been working toward. Everything was coming together. But there was still one thing left to fix: the brakes. It had been a constant battle, trying to restore the Jeep's braking system. Each time she thought she had made progress, another issue would arise. Today, however, something felt different. The parts were finally falling into place, the pieces clicking together as they should. Her hands moved with practiced ease as she adjusted the brake lines, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. Then, something strange happened. As Jenna connected the final line to the brake system, she felt a small vibration beneath her fingertips. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the metal. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Could it be? Was this a coincidence? Or was the Jeep truly hiding something? She leaned in closer, her breath shallow as she examined the area where the vibration had come from. There, beneath the brake assembly, a faint outline of a compartment became visible. It wasn't obvious at first, just a small, nearly invisible seam in the metal. But it was there, just waiting to be uncovered. Jenna's fingers shook as she reached for a small pry bar, careful not to damage the surrounding metal. She slid it into the seam, and with a gentle tug, popped open the compartment. Inside, there was a small wooden box, its edges smooth from years of wear. It was nothing like the other parts of the Jeep. This box was intentional, hidden, carefully placed. Jenna's breath caught in her throat as she lifted it out of the compartment. The box felt warm to the touch, as though it had been waiting for this moment. She held it in her hands, unsure of what to expect. Slowly, she opened it, her fingers trembling as the lid creaked open. Inside, there was a series of old documents, some in a language she didn't recognize, and a small, worn photograph. Jenna's eyes immediately went to the photograph. It was of Charlie Larkin again this time, a younger version of him, standing with a man who looked remarkably like Sam. But there was something else in the photo. Behind them, faintly visible in the background, was a large, metal structure. The kind of structure you didn't just see every day. Jenna's eyes narrowed. What was this? And why had Charlie hidden it inside the Jeep? The documents inside the box appeared to be notes, scribbled in that same hurried handwriting she had seen in the journal. Jenna carefully began to unfold the top sheet. As she scanned the words, her heart raced. The notes spoke of a hidden location, of treasures, yes, treasures, but more importantly, of something dangerous. Charlie had been involved in something far bigger than Jenna had ever imagined. His disappearance wasn't just some random event. It had been tied to this very Jeep, this very secret. The photo, the documents, the hidden compartment, it all pointed to one thing. Charlie hadn't just disappeared. He had been part of something much darker, something that had to be kept hidden from the world. And Jenna was standing on the edge of it, with the Jeep as her only guide. Her mind raced as she flipped through the documents. The notes spoke of a map, a location, and a series of codes. But the most chilling part was the final line, written in a hurried scrawl. If you find this, be prepared. They won't stop looking for it. Jenna's pulse quickened. She had crossed a line. She wasn't just restoring a Jeep anymore. She was caught in the middle of something much larger, something that threatened to pull her into a world she wasn't ready for. But there was no turning back now. Jenna had uncovered the first clue to the truth, and there was only one thing left to do. She was going to finish what Charlie had started. The next few days were filled with tension. Jenna's hands were still coated in grease, her body exhausted from the endless work, but her mind couldn't stop racing. She had uncovered so much in such a short time: the hidden compartment, the photograph, and the chilling notes Charlie had left behind. There was something deeper here, something dangerous that she couldn't ignore. But the more Jenna tried to focus on the restoration, the more she realized she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every glance from the townsfolk felt heavier than before. It wasn't just idle curiosity anymore. It was suspicion. As Jenna worked on the final touches of the Jeep's restoration, a group of locals gathered in the distance, whispering among themselves. She could feel their eyes on her, like the weight of their judgment was pressing down harder with each passing minute. The familiar jeers had started again, louder this time, with a new edge of concern. "Did you hear about Jenna?" A woman's voice floated across the breeze. "They say she's been digging into old family secrets, things best left buried." "She's not even from here," another voice added, thick with disdain. "I told you we shouldn't have let her take on that Jeep. It's just asking for trouble." Jenna clenched her fists at her sides, resisting the urge to march over and confront them. But she knew what would happen if she did. They would twist the truth, turn it into something ugly. The whispers had already begun to spread. She was no longer just the mechanic working on an old Jeep. Now, she was the outsider meddling with things she didn't understand. And the worst part? Some of the people who had once supported her had started to turn away. Even Mike, the local auto parts supplier, had been quieter lately, offering only short nods when they passed each other. It seemed like he was distancing himself, unsure of where his loyalties should lie. It wasn't just the townsfolk who were growing wary of her work. As Jenna continued to uncover more of the story, she realized that there were people in the shadows, people who didn't want her to get too close to the truth. Whoever Charlie had been running from, they were still out there, watching, waiting. Jenna paused her work, staring down at the Jeep's nearly restored frame. It was gleaming now, a testament to her hard work and determination. The engine was purring, the body nearly flawless. The Jeep was almost ready for its first test drive. But Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just fixing a car anymore. She was walking a fine line between restoring something valuable and unlocking a door that should remain closed. As she wiped her hands on her rag, she heard footsteps approaching. The unmistakable sound of boots crunching on gravel. She didn't need to look up to know it was Sam. "You're making progress," he said quietly, standing a few feet away from her. Jenna glanced up at him, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "I'm almost done," she said. "But the town, they're starting to turn on me. They're saying I'm digging up things I shouldn't." Sam's expression remained unreadable. "They're scared," he said simply. "This town doesn't like to be reminded of its secrets. They like things buried, forgotten. And when someone tries to dig them up, they push back. They always do." Jenna nodded, her mind racing. "I know, but this isn't just about the Jeep anymore. It's about Charlie. He didn't disappear for no reason. I think someone's still looking for whatever he left behind. And now, they might be looking for me." Sam's eyes hardened. "You're right. They're still out there. I've been trying to warn you, but you're already in too deep." Jenna took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "What am I supposed to do now, Sam? I can't just ignore it. The Jeep is part of something much bigger than us, and I have to finish what I started." Sam hesitated, his eyes flickering to the Jeep before locking onto hers. "You don't have to do this alone, you know. I've been in this fight longer than you've been alive. We can figure this out together." But Jenna shook her head. "I don't want to drag anyone else into this. I've already gotten this far by myself, and I can't back down now." Sam's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He understood her determination. "I can't stop you," he said, "but I can give you something to help. There's a safe house outside of town. You'll need it soon. Trust me." Jenna didn't respond right away, her thoughts swirling. She had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, but it was clear now that she couldn't back out. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. The townspeople were growing restless. They were scared of what she might uncover, and in their fear, they would stop at nothing to keep it buried. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jenna wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let them win. And when she fired up the Jeep for its first test drive, she wasn't just testing the engine, she was taking the first step toward uncovering a truth that no one in Riverbend was ready to face. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon when Jenna climbed into the Jeep, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent weeks rebuilding the vehicle, every turn of the wrench, every stroke of the brush, and every hour spent restoring it now felt like a culmination of everything she had worked for. But there was more than just pride in her chest tonight. Tonight, she wasn't just taking the Jeep for a spin, she was about to show the town what she was capable of. The engine turned over smoothly, purring to life with a deep, satisfying growl. Jenna adjusted the gear shift, slowly pulling the Jeep out of the dirt lot. The tires gripped the ground, the vehicle surprisingly steady despite its age. For the first time, it felt real. It felt alive. As she drove through the winding streets of Riverbend, Jenna could feel the weight of the townsfolk's judgment looming over her. She had spent so much time trying to silence their mocking whispers, but now she was ready to let the Jeep do the talking. As the wind rushed through her hair and the hum of the engine filled the air, it felt like the Jeep was finally telling its own story, one of resilience, of second chances, of untold secrets just waiting to be revealed. Her route was simple: a loop through the town, passing the diner, the hardware store, and the local gas station. But every street she passed felt like a mile farther from the skepticism, the doubt, and the isolation she had felt just days before. The road beneath her seemed to stretch endlessly, her heart beating in time with the rumble of the Jeep's engine. But as she turned onto the main street, something caught her eye. A group of people had gathered outside the diner, talking animatedly, their eyes glued to the Jeep as she drove past. The whispers had started again, louder this time, as they pointed and stared. Jenna could feel their gaze like a weight pressing on her chest. But instead of the usual sneers and dismissive glances, this time there was something different in their expressions. Curiosity, admiration, and maybe even a bit of awe. She wasn't the outsider anymore. She was the one who had brought this old machine back to life, the one who had taken on a challenge no one else dared to, and the people who had once doubted her were finally starting to realize that she wasn't just fixing an old Jeep, she was rebuilding her own place in this town, her own future. Jenna smiled, the first genuine smile she'd had in weeks. She drove past the diner again, this time slower, allowing the townspeople to see the Jeep in all its glory. The vehicle was no longer just an old rust bucket. It was a work of art, a symbol of her determination, and the key to something much bigger than herself. But then, just as she was about to turn the corner and head back to her shop, something unexpected happened. A man stepped out of the shadows, standing at the edge of the street. His face was obscured by the dim light, but there was something about him that sent a chill down Jenna's spine. He was watching her, his eyes cold and calculating. Jenna slowed the Jeep to a stop, her hands instinctively tightening on the steering wheel. The man didn't move. He just stood there, staring. "Can I help you?" Jenna called out, her voice steady but laced with wariness. The man didn't answer at first. Instead, he slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something that made Jenna's breath catch. A small, familiar key, the very same one she had found hidden inside the Jeep. Jenna's heart skipped a beat. She knew who he was. This wasn't just any stranger. This was someone who had been watching her, waiting for her to uncover the truth. The man who had been hunting Charlie's secret. "I think you found something you weren't supposed to," the man said, his voice low and threatening. Jenna's pulse raced. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading. The reason why the town had been so wary of her. The reason why people had tried to warn her to stop digging. She had unearthed something that had been hidden for a reason. "What do you want?" Jenna asked, her voice calm, though she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The man took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "I want what Charlie left behind, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it." Jenna's hand moved to the ignition, her fingers brushing against the key. She wasn't sure what to do next, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to hand over the Jeep, not now, not after everything she had been through. "I don't think you understand," she said slowly, her eyes locking with his. "I'm not giving it up. Not now, not ever." The man's lips curled into a smirk. "You'll regret that decision, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with venom. With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Jenna sitting in the Jeep, her mind racing. The truth was more dangerous than she had imagined. Whoever this man was, he was tied to Charlie's disappearance. He was part of the mystery Jenna had stumbled upon, and now she had a choice to make. Keep digging and risk everything, or walk away and let the truth remain buried. But Jenna knew there was no walking away now. She had come too far, and she wasn't about to let someone like him scare her off. As she turned the Jeep back toward her shop, she felt the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. The journey was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. Jenna arrived back at the shop with a newfound sense of purpose. The Jeep, now fully restored, idled softly behind her as the wind rustled the trees lining the riverbank. She hadn't expected to encounter the mysterious man, or to feel such a rush of fear and determination coursing through her. But now, standing in the dim light of her shop, she felt a clarity she hadn't had before. The truth was out there. It had always been buried in the shadows, just waiting for the right person to uncover it. And she had been that person. It wasn't just about restoring a vehicle. It was about resurrecting a story, bringing back a legacy that had been forgotten and hidden for far too long. But there was more to it. The man with the key, the warnings, and the threats, he was just a part of a bigger puzzle. Jenna knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Whoever was behind Charlie's disappearance was still watching, still lurking in the corners of Riverbend. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had come this far, and she would finish what she started. Jenna stood by the Jeep, her fingers brushing the smooth metal of the hood. She had done it. She had restored the Jeep, brought it back to life. But now it was more than just a car. It was a key to something larger, something far bigger than she could have imagined. She glanced at the old map she had found in Charlie's journal, the one that led to a secret location, the one that tied everything together. She could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her, but instead of fear, there was excitement. The mystery wasn't just about the Jeep. It was about the adventure that lay ahead, about finding the answers and bringing the past to light. Jenna took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. She was ready. As she started to walk toward her workbench, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to find Sam standing in the doorway, a serious look on his face. He didn't speak at first, just nodded toward the Jeep. "You've done it," he said quietly. "It's ready." Jenna smiled faintly. "It's more than ready. But I'm not done yet." Sam's gaze hardened, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. "I know. You're about to uncover the truth, aren't you?" Jenna nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I have to. It's the only way to finish this, and it's the only way to put an end to everything Charlie started." Sam stepped forward, his voice low but earnest. "Then you need to be careful. There are people out there who'll stop at nothing to keep the secrets buried. Don't trust anyone, except for yourself." Jenna met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "I've learned to trust my instincts, and I've come this far. I won't stop now." With that, Sam turned and walked away, leaving Jenna standing alone in the shop, the glow of the Jeep casting shadows on the walls. She knew the town would never be the same after all this. She had proven herself as a mechanic, but now she was about to prove herself as something more, someone who could uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Jenna took a moment to glance out the window at the river, the water flowing calmly in the fading light. The past was still there, still buried beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. But the Jeep, her Jeep, was the key. She knew that now, and whatever lay ahead, she was ready. She would uncover every secret, follow every clue, and face whatever dangers came her way. No matter what happened, she wouldn't back down. Because the Jeep wasn't just about fixing something old. It was about discovering something new, something that would change everything. With one last look at the Jeep, Jenna climbed into the driver's seat. She turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The journey was just beginning.